They found handprints and drawings that are between 35,000 and 40,000 years old at a minimum. They could be even older.
Oh my God! Whoa!
For 40,000 years, no human eyes had seen what was hidden inside this cave. Not because it was lost, but because someone wanted it to stay buried forever. Deep beneath the cliffs of Gibraltar, archaeologists uncovered something impossible, a passage deliberately sealed with tightly packed sand, untouched since the age of the Neanderthals. When they finally broke through, after 9 years of excavation, they stepped into a chamber that had remained completely isolated for 40 millennia. What they found inside didn't look like an ordinary prehistoric shelter. Massive claw marks gouged into solid limestone, predator bones scattered where they should never have been, and a single seashell placed in the deepest, darkest corner of the cave, far beyond the reach of sunlight. Every discovery pointed to one terrifying question. Was this chamber hiding something or trapping something? Because whoever sealed this cave didn't simply walk away. They went to extraordinary lengths to make sure no one would ever enter again. And when modern scientists finally crossed that ancient barrier, they uncovered evidence that could rewrite everything we thought we knew about Neanderthals, prehistoric rituals, and one of archaeology's greatest mysteries. Before we reveal what was hidden inside this 40,000-year-old chamber, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications, because the discoveries you're about to see are among the most shocking ever uncovered in human history. Now, let's step into the darkness of Vanguard Cave and uncover the secret that remained untouched for 40,000 years. Bones, claw marks, and discoveries that should never have existed together in one place. As the archaeologists crossed into the hidden chamber, they weren't greeted by ancient artifacts or scattered skeletons. Instead, it was the walls that immediately captured everyone's attention. The limestone surrounding them was carved with countless deep grooves, far too large and deliberate to be dismissed as ordinary erosion or the result of primitive tools. These marks cut straight into the solid rock, overlapping one another again and again, as though something had attacked the same section repeatedly with overwhelming force. Creating scars this deep in limestone would have required incredible power, but the most chilling detail was their direction. Every mark had been made from inside the chamber. Whatever left them wasn't trying to force its way in. It had been trapped inside, desperately struggling to break free. For thousands of years, the stone had silently preserved the final moments of that terrifying struggle. As the team continued their investigation, another mystery emerged. Scattered across the chamber were the remains of a lynx, a spotted hyena, and a griffon vulture. These weren't ordinary animals, they were apex predators that almost never occupy the same space in the wild. Lynxes and hyenas fiercely compete for territory, while griffon vultures spend their lives soaring through open skies and rarely enter enclosed places. Nature simply doesn't gather these three species together inside a sealed cave high above the coastline. The evidence suggested that someone had intentionally brought them there. Archaeologists believe Neanderthals carefully selected these animals, possibly for hunting practice, ceremonial purposes, or to collect valuable feathers, bones, and pelts that held significance far beyond simple survival. Professor Clive Finlayson's research team had already uncovered repeated evidence showing that the Neanderthals living in Vanguard Cave collected materials from animals they never intended to eat. The griffon vulture offered one of the strongest clues. Its meat wasn't considered an important food source, but its enormous feathers were striking, rare, and difficult to obtain. Their presence suggested symbolic or decorative value rather than practical use. The spotted hyena made the discovery even more extraordinary. Hyenas are among the strongest scavengers on Earth, equipped with jaws capable of crushing solid bone. Transporting one into a cave would have required planning, determination, and considerable risk. Yet its remains showed no indication that it had ever lived or died naturally inside the chamber. It had been deliberately placed there. Then, there were the claw marks again. Every piece of evidence pointed back to them. Whatever had been sealed inside that chamber had fought relentlessly against solid limestone until it could fight no more. Those grooves preserved the final desperate attempts of a trapped creature, frozen in stone for 40,000 years. Standing in complete silence, surrounded by impossible animal remains and haunting evidence of a desperate escape, one member of the archaeological team noticed something much smaller, resting quietly in the deepest corner of the chamber. At first glance, it seemed insignificant, but it would soon become one of the most important discoveries of the entire excavation. Lying at the farthest point from the entrance was a single whelk shell, a shell from a sea snail that naturally lives in the shallow waters of the Mediterranean coast. There was no natural explanation for its presence. Sea snails don't travel inland, climb cliffs, or somehow find their way into a chamber sealed for 40,000 years. Someone had carried it there. Imagine the journey. A Neanderthal walking to the shoreline, selecting the shell, carrying it back to the cave, descending 13 meters into complete darkness, and carefully placing it at the most remote spot possible. That wasn't an accident. It was a deliberate decision. Professor Finlayson stated it clearly. Whoever placed that shell inside the chamber lived more than 40,000 years ago, and at that time, the only humans inhabiting the region were Neanderthals. If the shell had been collected as food, logic suggests it would have been stored near the entrance where it could easily be retrieved. Instead, it was hidden at the very end of the sealed chamber. Similar whelk shells discovered at other Neanderthal sites across Europe have been found with traces of red ochre inside them. Ochre, a natural mineral pigment, was widely used in prehistoric times to color skin, decorate objects, and mark surfaces. The curved interior of a whelk shell forms a perfect natural container for mixing and holding pigment, making it an ideal tool for painting. That means this shell was almost certainly far more than a leftover meal. It was likely a container used in artistic or symbolic activities. That single discovery challenged one of the oldest assumptions in archaeology. For generations, scientists believed creativity belonged exclusively to modern humans. The ability to create art, use symbolism, and express ideas was considered the defining trait that separated our species from Neanderthals. According to that long-accepted theory, modern humans survived because they possessed imagination, while Neanderthals lacked it. But a pigment shell, intentionally carried deep into a sealed cave, completely changes that picture. It reveals individuals capable of planning, symbolism, and artistic expression. They weren't merely surviving from day to day. They were creating, decorating, and assigning meaning to the world around them. For much of the 20th century, Neanderthals were portrayed as primitive, unintelligent, and incapable of complex thought. Textbooks described them as an evolutionary dead end that disappeared when modern humans spread across Europe. Yet every discovery inside Vanguard Cave tells a very different story. These people carefully selected meaningful objects, transported them with purpose, and carried out actions that reflected planning, imagination, and culture. And astonishingly, even these discoveries were only the beginning. Hidden beneath the chamber lay evidence that would challenge everything archaeologists thought they understood about the final days of the Neanderthals. Buried beneath the sealed chamber, in sediment far older than the discoveries above it, archaeologists uncovered evidence that completely contradicted the long-held belief that Neanderthals lacked advanced intelligence. Hidden within those ancient layers was a carefully engineered hearth, not a simple fire pit used for warmth or cooking, but a structure specifically designed for a much more sophisticated purpose. It featured a circular chamber with 2 internal channels and reinforced walls, all built to heat plant material under extremely low oxygen conditions. Radiocarbon dating placed its construction at nearly 60,000 years ago, making it one of the oldest known examples of controlled chemical engineering. The hearth operated using a process scientists now call pyrolysis. When certain plants are heated with very little oxygen, the natural resins trapped inside begin to break down, releasing a thick, sticky substance. As it cools, that substance hardens into tar, a remarkably strong adhesive capable of binding different materials together. Long before chemistry had a name for this process, Neanderthals living on the Mediterranean coast had already mastered it. They intentionally built specialized furnaces capable of controlling both temperature and airflow to manufacture tar with impressive consistency. The most remarkable feature wasn't simply that the hearth worked, it was how it was designed. Instead of relying on a single passage, the structure contained 2 carefully planned channels separated by insulated walls. That level of complexity doesn't appear in a first attempt. It reflects years, perhaps generations, of experimentation and refinement. Someone built an earlier version, recognized its weaknesses, improved the design, and then passed that knowledge on to others. This wasn't instinctive behavior. It was accumulated experience, preserved through teaching, learning, and continuous innovation. Unlike Neanderthals living in colder parts of Europe, who commonly extracted tar from birch bark, the inhabitants of Gibraltar adapted the same chemical process to gumrock rose, a shrub native to the Mediterranean region. That adaptation is incredibly significant because it demonstrates more than simple imitation. It shows they understood the underlying principles well enough to apply the technique to completely different raw materials. They weren't blindly repeating inherited instructions. They understood why the process worked and successfully modified it to suit their own environment. Chemical testing of the tar, recovered from the site, revealed something even more surprising. Samples taken from different production events shared nearly identical properties, proving the results were highly consistent over long periods of time. This wasn't experimental chemistry carried out by chance. It was standardized production. They repeatedly achieved the same quality of adhesive, indicating careful control over the entire manufacturing process. In modern terms, they were practicing quality control nearly 60,000 years ago. That tar served a critical purpose. It was used to attach sharpened stone points securely onto wooden shafts, creating sophisticated composite weapons. These tools depended on every component functioning together. If the adhesive failed, the entire weapon became useless. The evidence shows Neanderthals understood this relationship. They repaired damaged equipment, replaced broken parts, and maintained their tools over time. Such behavior reflects long-term planning, problem-solving, and systems thinking, abilities once believed to belong exclusively to modern humans. But the surprises inside Gibraltar's caves didn't end there. Deep within Gorham's cave, researchers discovered another extraordinary clue carved directly into the limestone bedrock. It wasn't a random scratch or damage caused by ordinary tool use. Instead, it formed a carefully organized, cross-hatched pattern with straight lines intersecting each other in a deliberate geometric arrangement. Dating confirmed the engraving was more than 39,000 years old, created before modern humans had reached this region of Europe. Scientists closely examined the carving and determined that producing it required at least 54 separate strokes of a sharp stone tool. It wasn't completed in one continuous motion or accidentally while preparing equipment. Every individual line represented a conscious decision. The person making the engraving paused repeatedly, evaluated the growing design, and intentionally continued until the entire pattern was complete. 54 separate actions combined to create a single planned image. Experimental recreations provided even stronger evidence. By studying the overlapping grooves, researchers reconstructed the exact order in which the lines had been carved. The longer primary grooves were created first, while the shorter intersecting strokes were added afterward to complete the cross-hatched pattern. That sequence reveals something profound. The artist wasn't inventing the design as they worked. The complete image already existed in their mind before the first mark was ever made. They envisioned the final result and then carefully brought that idea into reality. The location of the engraving makes the discovery even more remarkable. It wasn't carved near the cave entrance, where daylight could illuminate the rock. Instead, it lay deep inside the cave, where natural light never reaches. Whoever created those 54 deliberate strokes worked in almost complete darkness. That means one of two things must be true. Either they memorized the design so precisely that they could carve it almost entirely by touch, or they deliberately produced artificial light to illuminate their work. Both possibilities demand levels of planning, foresight, and abstract thinking that completely undermine the outdated stereotype of Neanderthals as unintelligent or incapable of symbolic behavior. For decades, archaeologists believed the ability to create abstract symbols marked the dividing line between modern humans and every other human species. Symbolic thought, artistic expression, and meaningful patterns were considered uniquely ours. According to that traditional view, Neanderthals simply lacked the cognitive ability to cross that threshold. Yet the engraving inside Gorham's cave existed long before modern humans entered the region. It was conceived, planned, and executed by a Neanderthal using dozens of deliberate strokes deep inside a dark cave, leaving behind undeniable evidence of abstract thought. When Professor Clive Finlayson, who has spent decades studying Gibraltar's caves, was asked what the engraving actually represented, his response was refreshingly honest. He admitted no one can say for certain whether it was art, a symbol, or something entirely different, but one fact is beyond dispute. More than 39,000 years ago, when no modern humans lived anywhere near Gibraltar, a Neanderthal intentionally carved an abstract design into solid stone, and in doing so, left behind powerful evidence that forces us to rethink everything we believed about the human mind. The world's leading expert on Neanderthal behavior looked at the mysterious engraving inside Gorham's cave and admitted something astonishing. He couldn't say exactly what it meant, not because the evidence was unclear, but because it no longer fit the old picture of Neanderthals. Every new discovery was forcing scientists to rethink what they believed they knew. The strongest evidence came not from tools or carvings, but from the way Neanderthals treated their dead. Across Europe, archaeologists uncovered graves showing that these ancient people didn't simply abandon those who died. They buried them with care. At Shanidar Cave, a Neanderthal buried nearly 60,000 years ago was surrounded by pollen from flowering plants that had been collected outside the cave and deliberately placed beside the body. The individual had been carefully positioned inside a prepared grave, suggesting an act of respect rather than simple disposal. Other burial sites revealed the same pattern. Adults and children were laid to rest in organized graves, some marked with red ochre, the same pigment Neanderthals used on tools and objects. At several locations, animal bones had been intentionally placed beside the deceased. These discoveries suggest rituals, remembrance, and perhaps even beliefs about life after death. Whatever those beliefs were, they meant enough for Neanderthals to act upon them. This changes everything. A species once dismissed as primitive was showing signs of compassion, symbolism, and grief. These were not creatures acting on instinct alone. They were people who cared for one another, honored their dead, and created traditions that survived across generations. But that leads to an even bigger question. If Neanderthals could invent technology, master complex chemistry, create abstract symbols, and perform meaningful burials, then what caused their disappearance? For many years, scientists believed Neanderthals vanished around 40,000 years ago. However, discoveries in Gibraltar suggest some populations survived until nearly 32,000 years ago, making them the last known Neanderthals on Earth. At the very same time, modern humans were expanding across Europe. Again and again, archaeologists noticed the same pattern. Wherever modern humans arrived, Neanderthal populations eventually disappeared, yet they never vanished completely. Today, nearly every person of non-African ancestry carries between 1 and 4% Neanderthal DNA, proving that the two human species met, lived alongside one another, and even had children together. Their bloodline survives inside us, but their language, traditions, beliefs, and knowledge slowly faded from history. For 40,000 years, the chamber inside Vanguard Cave remained sealed in total darkness. When archaeologists finally opened it, they didn't discover treasure. They uncovered something far more valuable, a forgotten chapter of human history left behind by people who never knew they would become the last of their kind. And their story isn't finished yet. Excavations beneath the cave are still continuing, and researchers believe even older layers remain untouched. Every meter they dig has the potential to rewrite another chapter of our shared past. Perhaps the greatest lesson from Vanguard Cave is this: Neanderthals were never the primitive beings we once imagined. They were innovators, artists, engineers, and caregivers. They loved, they mourned, and they remembered. They weren't a lesser version of us. They were simply another kind of human. And after 40,000 years of silence, their voice is finally being heard again. If you're fascinated by forgotten civilizations, ancient mysteries, and discoveries that rewrite everything we thought we knew about human history, then you're in the right place. We bring you the most shocking archaeological discoveries, hidden secrets, and incredible scientific breakthroughs from around the world. So before we uncover what researchers are finding next beneath Vanguard Cave, take a second to subscribe, turn on the notification bell, and join our growing community. Your support helps us create more high-quality documentaries like this. Now, let's continue exploring one of the greatest archaeological mysteries ever uncovered.